Since I was a child, I've always been fascinated by scary stories and haunted adventures, but that day was forever etched in my memory. My friend Colin shared this same passion. When he invited me to explore an abandoned factory outside the city, I couldn't refuse. "Dude, this is going to be one of our most amazing adventures," he exclaimed, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Although the idea of haunted places scared me, my curiosity won out. That night we met up at 10 o'clock. Colin was brimming with enthusiasm, carrying a flashlight and a backpack filled with equipment. "This is where the best ghost stories are born, Mike," he said. I was a bit nervous, but I convinced myself that there was nothing truly frightening about spine-chilling tales or eerie legends. After all, they were just stories, right? The factory was a true monument to desolation. Large broken windows, walls covered in graffiti, and a silence that seemed to swallow all surrounding sounds. "Welcome to the real abandoned places at night," said Colin with a mischievous smile. The wind whistled through the crevices, creating a macabre symphony that heightened the tension. We ventured inside, lighting our way with our flashlights. Echoed through the vast, empty hall. The floor was littered with debris and pieces of rusty machinery. "They say this place is haunted, but no one knows why," Colin whispered. I nervously laughed. Maybe it's just another one of those scary stories to keep people away. However, something about the dense and oppressive atmosphere made me uneasy. We continued our exploration, wandering through dark corridors and empty rooms. "I think it's time for one of our ghost stories," Colin suggested. We sat on an old wooden bench, and he began to narrate a chilling tale about an old factory worker who mysteriously disappeared. As I listened, I couldn't help but feel a shiver run down my spine, but I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was all just stories. The night was still young, and although I attempted to convince myself that they were merely ghost stories, my sense of discomfort grew. "Colin, I think we've had enough spine-chilling tales for today," I said, trying to disguise my nervousness. Colin just laughed. "Relax, Mike. They're just dark legends. Let's keep exploring." I stood up and we pressed on, traversing a corridor that seemed to go on forever. That was when we heard the first sound, a metallic noise, as if something was being dragged across the floor. We stopped immediately, our flashlights trembling in our hands. "What was that?" I whispered. Colin looked at me, his eyes wide. "I have no idea. Maybe it's just the wind." We decided to follow the sound, even though every fiber of my being screamed for us to do the opposite. With each step, the noise grew louder and clearer. We reached a large room with a high ceiling and several doors lining the walls. The sound was coming from one of the doors on our right. We slowly approached, trying to be as quiet as possible. Colin cautiously opened the door, revealing a staircase leading down to a basement. "You go first," he said, trying to sound brave. I swallowed hard and began descending the stairs, my flashlight illuminating the concrete steps. The air was colder down there, and the smell of mold was strong. When we reached the bottom, the sound had ceased. I looked around, trying to locate the source of the noise, but all I saw was darkness. "Maybe it was our imagination," I suggested, trying to ease the tension. But before Colin could respond, a piercing scream reverberated through the basement, a human scream, filled with terror. We ran back towards the stairs, but the door at the top slammed shut with a loud bang. We were trapped in the dark, our hearts pounding. "Someone is playing a trick on us," said Colin, trying to maintain his composure. "It's a prank." Colin's heavy breathing beside me was the only sound I could hear. I forced myself to think rationally, searching for a way out of this situation. "Let's try to open the door," I suggested, my voice shaking. We climbed the stairs, and Colin pushed the door with all his might. It didn't budge. "Damn it," he exclaimed. "We're stuck here." Just then we heard footsteps, slow and deliberate. They echoed through the basement, drawing closer with each moment. "Who's there?" Colin shouted, pointing his flashlight into the darkness. There was no response, only the footsteps, steadily approaching. My hands were sweating, and my heart felt like it was going to burst. The haunted adventures we had sought had turned into a real-life nightmare. Suddenly, a man emerged from the shadows. His face was partially covered by a dirty mask, and he held an iron bar in his hand. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice deep and menacing. Colin and I exchanged glances, unsure how to respond. "We came to explore. We thought the place was abandoned," Colin said, trying to sound calm. The man laughed, a dry and bitter sound. "Abandoned? This place is my home." He took a step forward, and we could see that his eyes were filled with anger and desperation. "You shouldn't be here. Now you will pay for it." I felt panic wash over me. This wasn't just some mysterious encounter. We were dealing with someone who wasn't in their right mind. We tried to argue, explaining that we meant no harm, but he wouldn't listen. He advanced towards us, raising the iron bar. It was then that I realized we had to fight for our survival. Colin lunged at him, attempting to disarm him. The struggle was chaotic and desperate, with screams and the sound of metal clashing against concrete. Amidst the chaos, I managed to grab the flashlight and strike the man's head, rendering him unconscious. "We need to get out of here," Colin panted. We ran back towards the stairs, and this time, we were able to open the door. We quickly ascended, leaving the nocturnal horror behind. When we finally exited the factory, the sense of relief was indescribable. "Never again," said Colin, looking at me with a tired smile. "Never again will we go looking for haunted places at night." We were free, but the experience had left us shaken. We walked silently across the factory grounds, the weight of what we had just endured pressing down on our shoulders. Colin broke the silence first. "Dude, that was insane. We need to tell someone about this, but who's going to believe stories of ghosts and mysterious encounters?" His voice trembled as he struggled to process what had just happened. I nodded in agreement. "No one will believe us. They'll think they're just scary, paranormal tales. But we know the truth." As we walked back towards the city, my thoughts were in disarray. Was everything that happened real? Or was the factory and its disturbed resident just a nightmare of our imagination? When we finally reached the illuminated streets of the city, we decided to stop at a 24-hour diner. We needed a safe place to catch our breath and try to make sense of what had transpired. We sat at a table, and Colin ordered 2 cups of coffee. "Mike, do you think anyone will investigate that place?" he asked, still looking around as if expecting to see the masked man at any moment. I don't know, Colin. Maybe it's better to just let it go. I don't want to have anything more to do with nocturnal horrors or haunted adventures." This was too much. We sipped our coffee in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. What had started as a night of fun and adrenaline had turned into a true nightmare. Those ghost stories and eerie legends that had fascinated us now held a new meaning. We decided not to tell anyone about what happened that night. Who would believe us? It would just be another one of those scary stories people like to share, but never take seriously. Colin and I made a pact. We would never again venture into abandoned places at night. That event changed us in ways neither of us could have imagined. We returned to our normal lives, but the memory of that night never fully faded away. Sometimes we would find ourselves thinking about the man in the factory, the sounds, and the fear we felt. We learned that some adventures aren't worth the risk, and that some mysterious encounters can leave indelible scars. And so, with invisible wounds, we moved forward, aware that spine-chilling tales hold a kernel of truth that is more frightening than anyone could imagine. My name is Jack, and I've always been a skeptic when it comes to ghost stories. One night, my friends Mark and Lauren challenged me to visit one of the allegedly true haunted abandoned places at night. They claimed it would be one of the most terrifying paranormal adventures one could experience. I accepted the challenge with a smile, certain that I would walk away laughing at the scary stories they often told. We arrived at the old sanitarium at 10 p.m. The building, in ruins, exuded an aura of decay and oblivion. Lauren, with a flashlight in hand, led the way while Mark documented everything with his camera. "Let's go in before I change my mind," Lauren joked, trying to disguise her nervousness. The ghost stories and spine-chilling tales of that place made every step echo in our minds like a dark warning. Inside the sanitarium, the air was heavy and damp. The walls, covered in graffiti and moss, seemed to whisper eerie legends of past patients. "Look, this wing was for the most dangerous patients," said Mark, pointing to an ajar door. Lauren and I exchanged a complice glance before moving forward. Little did we know that we were about to dive into the nocturnal horrors that the place held. We explored the dark corridors, each room revealing fragments of the past. In one of them, we found old rusty beds and hospital gowns scattered on the floor. "Imagine how many scary stories these corridors have witnessed," Lauren whispered, visibly disturbed. I laughed, but my laughter quickly died on my lips as I heard a distant, almost imperceptible sound of something dragging. "Did you hear that?" I asked, trying to hide my unease. Mark and Lauren nodded, the tension in the air becoming palpable. We decided to move on, convinced that it was just the wind. But as we progressed, the sound repeated, louder and closer. Amid the mysterious encounters we expected, we were unprepared to confront our own fears so closely. The sound became clearer, a constant rhythmic dragging that reverberated through the corridors. We stopped in front of a large double door, apparently the entrance to the dining hall. Mark slowly opened the door, the wood creaking under the pressure. The room was dark, except for the beam of light from Lauren's flashlight. The silence was so dense that we could almost hear our own hearts beating. We entered the dining hall, where tables and chairs were overturned, covered in dust and cobwebs. "This place is truly one of the most real haunted abandoned places I've ever seen," commented Mark, trying to relieve the tension with his enthusiasm for haunted adventures. But something was different there. The air felt heavier, and an oppressive sensation enveloped us. Suddenly, Lauren's flashlight flickered and went out. We were plunged into complete darkness, our eyes struggling to adjust to the pitch-black surroundings. "Damn, the battery died," she murmured. Mark took out his phone, using the faint light to guide us. It was then that we heard the dragging sound again. But this time it was coming from inside the dining hall. A chill ran down my spine, and I felt that all three of us shared the same inexplicable fear. "We need to get out of here," Mark said, his voice trembling. We agreed, but as we turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind us. We stood paralyzed for a moment, panic beginning to set in. "Who did that?" I asked, although I knew none of us had an answer. Lauren tried to open the door, but it was locked. We were trapped in the heart of one of the most terrifying haunted places. We started looking for another way out, but the dragging sound continued, now seeming to come from all directions. The darkness and silence only made things worse. These scary stories always seemed exaggerated, but now, Lauren whispered, her voice faltering. The reality of being trapped in a place so steeped in ghost stories and paranormal phenomena began to weigh on us. We were living through our own nocturnal horrors, and with each step, the feeling that something was terribly wrong only intensified. With each failed attempt to find an exit, desperation began to take hold. "Mark, keep filming. We need some proof if we make it out of here," I whispered, trying to maintain my composure. He nodded, but I could see the terror in his eyes. Lauren visibly trembled, clinging to whatever courage she had left. As we explored a side room, we came across an old medicine cabinet. Its door was slightly ajar, and as we approached, we again heard the dragging sound. But this time it was accompanied by a faint whisper, almost imperceptible, echoing through the corridors. "This is insane, we need to focus," said Mark, trying to sound rational. But the truth was that we were being consumed by our own fears, every sound and shadow amplifying our paranoia. Suddenly, Lauren found a partially open window. "Here, maybe we can get out this way," she exclaimed with a glimmer of hope. Mark and I rushed to her, but as we tried to fully open the window, it jammed. As we struggled, the dragging sound drew closer, and the whispers became clearer, indecipherable words laden with despair. Then Mark turned, The camera focused on something in the corridor. "Are you seeing this?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Lauren and I looked and saw an indistinct figure, a shadow that seemed to float. "This is impossible," I muttered, my heart racing. The figure slowly approached, and a wave of panic made us redouble our efforts to open the window. Every second felt like an eternity, every sound amplifying the spine-chilling tales we had always scoffed at. Finally, the window gave way a little, and Lauren managed to squeeze through, followed by Mark. When it was my turn, I looked back one last time and saw that the figure had stopped, just a few meters away from us. Its eyes, empty and penetrating, seemed to see right through me. With a final push, I climbed out the window, falling to the ground outside. We got up and ran, not daring to look back, our footsteps echoing like a cry of freedom against the nocturnal horrors we left behind. We were free, but forever marked by the mysterious encounters of that night. Darkness fell upon us as the wind whistled through the rusted structures of the old amusement park. I, Michael, along with my friends Sarah and Liam, were fascinated by haunted adventures and ghost stories. That night, we decided to explore one of the most genuinely abandoned places at night. The Old City Amusement Park, known for its dark legends and chilling tales. The main gate was locked, but Liam, always prepared, found an opening in the fence. "Let's go before someone sees us," he whispered, excitement glinting in his eyes. Sarah, on the other hand, hesitated. "Is it safe?" she asked, clutching the flashlight to her chest. I, too, felt a chill run through my body, but curiosity was stronger. We needed to discover the truth behind the scary stories surrounding that place. We passed through the gate and entered the park, where the abandoned rides stood like forgotten shadows. The wind made the metal creak, as if the park itself was alive, waiting for new visitors. "This place is scarier than I imagined," I said softly as we walked down the main path. Each step seemed to echo, amplifying the sense of desolation that permeated the place. The carousel, once colorful and vibrant, was now covered in rust and moss. The wooden horses seemed to watch us, frozen in a macabre dance. "I've heard a lot of strange things happened here before they closed the park," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Some say it's one of the most haunted places in the region." Liam, always the skeptic, laughed. "They're just scary tales to frighten some idiots," he said. But even he couldn't completely hide his nervousness. We walked towards the Ferris wheel, which loomed like a sleeping giant against the night sky. The structure creaked in the wind. "Let's climb up," Liam suggested, pointing to the maintenance ladder. Reluctantly, Sarah and I agreed. We climbed slowly, each step bringing a new wave of fear and anticipation. When we finally reached the top, the view was both desolate and fascinating. The abandoned park stretched out below us, a maze of shadows and forgotten memories. Suddenly, a strange sound came from afar, interrupting our silence. "Did you hear that?" I asked, trying to locate the source of the noise. Sarah grabbed my arm, her eyes wide. "Let's get out of here, Michael," she pleaded, fear evident in her voice. Liam, however, was determined to find out what was happening. "Just a little longer, we need to know the truth behind these ghost stories," he insisted. And so, against my better judgment, we pressed on, unaware that we were about to encounter the night horrors that the abandoned park hid. We descended from the Ferris wheel, our hearts still racing from the strange atmosphere of the park. The sound we heard still echoed in our minds, a constant reminder that something was not right. Liam led the way towards the old House of Mirrors, one of the park's most sinister places. The reflective walls were broken and dirty, creating distorted and unsettling images of ourselves as we passed. Sarah stopped suddenly, staring at a broken mirror. "There's something here," she said, pointing to a small opening in the wall. Liam and I approached, illuminating the hole with our flashlights. Behind the wall was a small hidden compartment, filled with old toys and tickets, as if someone had hidden a piece of the park's history there. "What is this?" I asked, picking up one of the dusty tickets. "Maybe it's from when the park was still operating," Liam suggested. though his voice betrayed a note of uncertainty. The atmosphere in the House of Mirrors was suffocating, and the deformed reflections seemed to watch us, creating a perfect setting for scary stories. "Let's get out of here," said Sarah, looking around nervously. We agreed. Leaving the House of Mirrors and returning to the main path, we headed for the roller coaster, which rose like a steel serpent. "This place is a true collection of night horrors," I commented, trying to ease the tension with humor. Liam laughed, but the sound was forced. "Let's see if we can get to the top," he suggested. Always looking for the next challenge, we climbed the rusty ladder that led to the first car of the roller coaster. Each step seemed to protest under our weight, as if the very structure was warning us to give up. When we finally sat in the car, a strange calm fell over us. "Do you think it's safe?" Sarah asked, her voice almost inaudible. "Just once, at least to have a story to tell," Liam replied with a nervous smile. Suddenly, the roller coaster started to move slowly and noisily, climbing the first hill. "That's impossible, there's no power here," I exclaimed, holding on tight. Sarah screamed, and Liam tried to stay calm, but the fear was real. As we climbed, the park turned into a blur of shadows and distant lights. Adrenaline pulsed through our veins, and each second seemed eternal. Finally, we reached the top, and the car stopped, swaying slightly. We looked down, the abandoned park stretching in all directions. The view was both magnificent and terrifying, a true setting for mysterious encounters. "What's happening?" I asked. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here," Liam replied, trying to stay calm. And so, with our hearts beating wildly, we prepared to descend the roller coaster and face the night horrors waiting for us below. With our hearts pounding, we descended the roller coaster and continued on the main path. The feeling that something was wrong was undeniable. Liam, always the fearless leader, pointed to the old haunted house, one of the park's most infamous attractions. "If we're going to find out what's happening here, we need to go in there," he said, with determination. Sarah looked at me, her eyes full of fear. "Michael, I really think we should leave," she pleaded, but curiosity and the need to understand the truth behind these ghost stories were too strong to ignore. "Just one more place, Sarah. I promise after this we'll leave," I said, trying to comfort her. She nodded reluctantly, and we headed towards the haunted house. The door to the house was ajar, creaking ominously as we pushed it open. The interior was even more terrifying than the exterior. The corridors were narrow and dark, decorated with dusty props and cobwebs. "Let's stay together," I suggested, as our steps echoed on the wooden floor. With each step, the air seemed to grow heavier, and a sense of despair enveloped us. Suddenly, a strange sound echoed down the corridor, like a distant cry. Sarah grabbed my arm tightly. "What was that?" she whispered, her eyes wide. Liam shone his flashlight down the corridor, but we couldn't see anything. "Probably an old sound effect, activated by some movement," he said, trying to sound rational. But we all knew that something else was at play. We continued walking deeper into the haunted house. We passed rooms decorated with grotesque figures and macabre scenes, each more disturbing than the last. "This place is a true temple of scary tales," I commented, trying to keep the humor, but fear gripped me. Finally, we reached a large room in the center of the house. In the middle of the floor was a circle drawn with strange symbols, like an altar for some ancient ritual. "What the hell is this?" Liam asked, cautiously approaching. Sarah started crying, fear finally overtaking us. "We need to get out of here now," she pleaded, her voice trembling. But before we could react, a loud, piercing sound filled the room, like a scream of agony. The floor began to shake, and the lights flickered frantically. "Run!" I shouted, pulling Sarah towards the exit. Liam was right behind, but the house seemed to have a life of its own, as if trying to keep us trapped inside. We ran without looking back, our hearts pounding wildly as we escaped the night horrors of that place. We bolted from the haunted house, adrenaline coursing through our veins. The park, with its sinister structures, seemed to want to swallow us whole. "To the car, quickly!" I shouted, gripping Sarah's hand tightly. Liam was right behind, breathless but determined to get out of that hellish place. We ran down the main path, past the rusted carousel and the Ferris wheel, which now seemed even more threatening. The wind blew harder, as if the park itself was trying to prevent us from leaving. Every sound, every shadow amplified our fears, turning the park into a true labyrinth of mysterious and paranormal encounters. Finally, we saw the main gate. The car was exactly where we left it, a sight that brought some relief. "Get in, quickly," Liam said, unlocking the doors with trembling hands. Sarah and I threw ourselves into the back seat while Liam struggled to start the engine. The park seemed to pulse around us, like a dark, malevolent heart. "Come on, Liam, quickly," I pleaded, looking back, expecting to see something terrible chasing us. The engine finally roared to life, and Liam sped off, skidding on the dirt as we left the park behind. The sense of relief was immediate, but the fear still clung to us with sharp claws. "What was that?" I asked, trying to catch my breath. Sarah was silently crying, clinging to me, while Liam kept his eyes fixed on the road. "I don't know, but I don't want to go back to find out," he replied, his voice grim. We drove in silence down the deserted road, leaving the park and its dark legends behind. The silence in the car was overwhelming, each of us lost in thoughts about the night horrors we had witnessed. Finally, Liam broke the silence. "I guess some ghost stories are real after all," he said with a nervous smile. Sarah let out a shaky laugh, but the fear still lingered. We arrived home, and without a word, we parted ways, each going to our own room. The weight of the night was upon us, and we knew it would be hard to sleep. I lay in bed, still hearing the sounds and seeing the shadows of the park in my mind. The experience had been too real, a true testament that some chilling tales and haunted adventures were more than just scary stories. The next morning we met in the kitchen, exhausted and still shaken. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked, her voice still trembling. Liam and I exchanged a look. "I think we need to take a break from these adventures," I suggested, trying to sound firm. Liam nodded. "I agree. Let's stay away from abandoned places at night for a while," he said, with a sad smile. And so we decided that our searches for night horrors and mysterious encounters were over, at least for now. That night showed us that some dark legends are based on something real, something that can't be explained or confronted. And that truth was enough to keep us away from abandoned amusement parks and any place where shadows dance and dark secrets lurk, waiting for new, unsuspecting adventurers.
If you enjoyed the video you just watched, you won't want to miss this next one. Click now and I'll see you there.